question. We now know why the Justice Department ordered the Mar-a-Lago search after failing to retrieve some of the more than 700 classified documents that Donald Trump took to his Florida home. But how do we know this? Well, multiple people briefed on the matter, says the New York Times story that most of the media called a bombshell. People familiar with the matter said it's clear that some of these sources work for DOJ and that these leaks are absolutely improper in a criminal investigation, even if the target's name is Trump. Yet most news outlets aren't even questioning how this came to light. Merrick Garland was getting creamed in the PR war as Trump repeatedly slammed the search as a break-in by an out-of-control FBI. But the Attorney General felt he couldn't publicly respond. So Justice Department officials made their case through leaks, which violate the rights of a potential defendant who hasn't been charged with anything and may not be. They made Garland's case from behind a curtain of anonymity. A follow-up piece in the Washington Post cited multiple people with direct knowledge of the investigation. None of this makes the stories inaccurate, but as an ethical matter, the leaks are indefensible. I'm Howard Kurtz, and this is Media Buzz. Joining us now to analyze the coverage, Molly Hemingway, editor-in-chief of The Federalist. And in Los Angeles, Leslie Marshall, the radio talk show host. Both are Fox News contributors. Molly, what do you make of the coverage of this breathlessly awaited but more than half redacted FBI affidavit, which contains such phrases as unlawful concealment and, as we just heard, probable cause that evidence of obstruction will be found at premises?
I think it's worth remembering where we were just a couple weeks ago. This was the most explosive story that we'd seen in, maybe decades. And you had everyone from Andrew Cuomo to George Will to the New Yorker to Mother Jones saying Department of Justice needed to quickly explain what justified this raid, if not indict within 2 weeks, in order to avoid this looking like a very politicized act. Instead, we've had weird press conferences, refusal to answer questions, the leaks you mentioned, and then this heavily redacted document where even the reasons for why it's redacted are redacted. And so the burden of proof is clearly on the FBI, and we should remember the FBI was an agency that falsified evidence in order to procure a warrant to spy on the Trump campaign just a few years ago. To say they have a very high burden of proof that they have dramatically failed to meet is an understatement.
Well, Leslie, this notion of let's see the evidence, I mean, this is an ongoing investigation. No one's been charged. No prosecution ever puts out its evidence at this stage of the game. But shouldn't the media acknowledge that, as expected, we didn't learn that much because so many pages were blacked out? Particularly, you could just kind of tell when it got to the most sensitive stuff.
Well, yeah, I don't think that you needed a degree from Harvard in rocket science to know that this was going to be heavily redacted for the reasons that you talk about, Howard. We're not just looking at an ongoing investigation. We're looking at an ongoing investigation to 3 potential criminal charges, one of which is espionage. People have been hung in this country in the past for that. So, I mean, this is very serious, and I know people want to make this political. This is not just about national security. This is about laws, and if laws are broken, I don't care who you are. I don't care if you're the Lord. You can't break the laws. And the investigation has to go on without this information. In addition, whose names are in there? Would there be any kind of witness tampering or any harm that could come to a witness? And certainly we have agents who need to be protected within our criminal justice system. So, yeah, look, people say this is unprecedented. It's all unprecedented. Leaks unprecedented, but it's also unprecedented to say, hey, show the whole world all of your evidence, because Molly is right. A prosecution, if this does go forward, are the people that have the burden to prove, right?
Right.
But you don't put that out. I've never seen in a court of law, here's what I got.
Well, not at this
trial.
stage, at least. Now, I should mention that the judge
Correct.
redacted some of this because he accepted the DOJ argument that some of this would, as you say, compromise confidential human sources or provide a roadmap to the investigation. Also, though, former President Trump, filing a suit that the press kind of laughed at, but the judge saying inclined to appoint a special master or outside expert to look at everything that was retrieved, although it seems to me the horse is out of the barn and DOJ is looking at this. Now, Molly, going back to what I said at the top on those New York Times and Washington Post stories, do you find it striking, as I do, that no one at the left-leaning news outlets even questions where these sensitive insider details came from when it's quite obviously, in part, the Department of Justice?
Again, this is the same thing we've been through for years. Yes, the Department of Justice and the FBI are leaking like colanders, and they have been doing that for years. They're going back to the very same reporters who helped them with the Russia collusion hoax, which again, nobody has really been held accountable for what was done to the Trump administration with that the years-long leak campaign with selective leaks to make it seem like Trump had stolen the 2016 election by conspiring with Russia. At the end of the day, that came to naught. So that means you have tens of millions of Americans who are now wise to this. They now understand that the FBI and Department of Justice go to reporters who they know are easily going to just regurgitate those leaks without any skepticism, without any demand for evidence, and they're sick and tired of it, and they're just not going along with it. The media are going along with it because I think they see this as a politicized raid that will help Democrats in the midterm elections or help Democrats in the next presidential election. And so they just don't have the scrutiny that any responsible journalist should have. And also, people who played along with the Russia collusion hoax should be banned from this type of coverage going further.
Well, I just note that there was Donald Trump's deputy attorney general who ordered the Russia investigation. We've certainly talked a lot on this program about the coverage of it. And also that the FBI is headed by a Trump appointee, Chris Wray. Leslie, here's what Donald Trump says, among many things he's posted on his social media site. The Justice Department and FBI are leaking at levels never seen before, and I did nothing wrong, referring to people at those agencies as thugs and hacks. Now, look, as a one-time Justice Department reporter myself, it's considered an ironclad rule that you can't leak about an ongoing criminal probe because it's monstrously unfair to a potential defendant, unless it's Trump, perhaps?
It's not only unfair, it's dangerous, and I really don't care who it's about. Sadly, we are not just in this time, and I would say I'm old enough to remember the Clinton administration, and I say that because there were leaks then, whether it was Nannygate, Travelgate, various women coming forward, and we have seen this. We've seen an erosion, whether it's with journalists or we've seen an erosion within these highly sensitive agencies, and honestly, we've also seen an erosion as to trust in these agencies, and sometimes it's on the left, sometimes it's on the right. It depends which political candidate they're attacking. To the politics of it that Molly mentioned, I just wanted to say briefly, I'm going to disagree with her on that, and I'll tell you why. I think this has helped Donald Trump politically and not my side of the aisle at all. We have seen within the Republican Party in the most recent polls the approval rating for Donald Trump going up, and as a matter of fact, a lot of people were saying, I don't think it's going to be Trump, I think it's going to be DeSantis it's going to be the nominee, and people are changing their tune on that. So I think, if anything, it has helped rile up the MAGA base of Donald Trump and made them less apathetic in the upcoming elections.
I agree with you to this point, but now maybe the picture is changing. And Molly, based on these leaky stories, but also other reporting, there's a picture emerging of Donald Trump resisting this year giving back some of the classified documents that the National Archives wanted, at one point inspecting the boxes themselves, and himself, I should say, and some at the highest level of classification. That sounds like pretty big news.
I could not disagree more strongly. I mean, this looks like a paperwork dispute, the kind that are very common with all outgoing presidents. There are secure facilities at Mar-a-Lago, obviously. They were there when he was president. He was working with the Department of Justice and FBI. And again, this is an agency that is directly and recently involved with trying to take this man down. They need to be doing everything perfectly. Instead, they do this ham-fisted raid. They blame Trump for it becoming public, as if it wouldn't have been public to do a raid like this. Merrick Garland gives a weird press conference where he refuses to answer questions, and they're leaking again in the same way that they have been going in the recent past. This is an FBI that just this week and Department of Justice that were involved in that Mark Zuckerberg story where he said that they had encouraged Facebook to suppress information before the election. I mean, this is an agency that is completely out of control. It is a threat to the republic, and people on both sides of the aisle need to care about having law enforcement agencies and intelligence agencies that are not this corrupted.
Well, I would just note that it's a court-approved warrant, and a judge had to approve this, therefore that's why I don't call it a raid. At the same time, let me ask you this, Leslie. This doesn't prove the court approved warrant was justified, but an email obtained by the Washington Post shows that Pat Cipollone, when he was White House counsel, final days of the administration, was assuring the National Archives that the documents, the classified documents, would be returned. And so it's not just a question of you know, what the former president has at Mar-a-Lago now. That was when he was still president. Your final thoughts?
Well, if we look at the National Archives, I mean, you know, sorry, paraphrasing here, but can we have those back? One, can we have those back, pretty please? Can you keep them in a more secure location, as some people are saying, you know, put a lock on it? You know, I'm sorry, I agree with you. This was not a raid. When we killed Osama bin Laden, that was a raid from where I stand. So, and another thing, if you have nothing to hide, then you have nothing to hide. If I have nothing to hide, come to my house, look through it, take any documents you want, and I'm not going to cry, whine, or play victim about it because I've done nothing.
Well, Donald Trump did support the affidavit being released, and again, there's a lot we still don't know. When Anthony Fauci announced he'll be stepping down in December as President Biden's chief medical advisor and head of the Infectious Disease Institute, he was immediately praised by media liberals and pilloried by media conservatives. Molly, what does it say about our journalistic culture that much of the media is hailing Anthony Fauci's career going back to the Reagan administration, and another part of the media vilifying him as a self-promoting liar who made the pandemic worse?
So I think since most of our corporate media are liberal, they're all praising him because they like that the things he did helped Democrats in recent elections. But I wish that we would just see much more balanced coverage, going back to the Reagan era when he was involved in very controversial handling of the public health crisis of AIDS, of his controversial handling of everything with COVID. Contrary to what Eugene Robinson says there's a credible accusation that Anthony Fauci was involved with U.S. policy toward gain-of-function research that directly related to this COVID pandemic that, you know, has killed so many millions of people worldwide. He gave conflicting information. He admitted to lying about what he told the American people because he didn't think that they could handle the truth about what the rates of vaccination would be or how he handled masking policy. This is someone who has had outsized role in the U.S. economy, in the lives of people. He needs to be handled critically, and Democrat media need to understand that just because they like the political outcomes, they should be operating as journalists now.
Leslie, what boosters like Rachel Maddow say is that Fauci is polarizing only because of right-wing attacks, and Fauci, who was constantly at odds with Donald Trump but embraced Joe Biden, also argues he's been demonized by conservatives.
I would agree from where I'm at. Remember, in the very beginning, Dr. Fauci, there weren't people on the right making voodoo dolls in his likeness and sticking pins in it when President Trump and he were in lockstep with one another with regard to the messaging surrounding COVID and the pandemic. And then when the president started to say some things that you saw, not only Dr. Fauci, but other doctors uncomfortable with it, Dr. Fauci had the guts to come up and go, no, I don't agree with that. You know, there was a demonization, and I feel it started from the former president that furthered that divide in the country. You know, I have to say, this man is somebody who devoted his career to helping others. You know, I'm married to a medical professional, to a physician, and it just is mind-blowing to me how this actually became political. I do think he saved lives. I think politics and the belief, I have friends in my own talk radio business that died because they refused to get vaccinated, or they were taking some kind of hocus-pocus potion that didn't work because they were, you know, believing a lot of these crazy blogs and the hype. And I think it's terrible. I mean, there have been death threats to this man and to this man's family. COVID is something that doctors still aren't 100% sure of. Doctors aren't gods, and medicine is not an exact science.
All right, well, we're a little tight on time here. Molly, the lockdowns were ultimately decided by governors and to a lesser extent the president. Did Fauci's never-ending round of interviews, print, podcast, TV, make him a bigger target and suggest that he was responsible for dealing with COVID as opposed to being an advisor?
I think it's a good point you raised that governors were ultimately responsible, but the media created such hysteria and made Fauci out to be this god. I mean, you remember all the people with their candles, their Fauci candles. They were worshiping and adoring him, and they were persecuting anyone who didn't follow whatever he said to a T. The media made him such an important figure, but he himself is almost delusionally narcissistic. I remember when he said that people attack him because they attack science. What a disgusting, you know, way of speaking, and what a way of not being self-critical and not being humble.
Leslie, Fauci admits he made mistakes. He was too slow on AIDS, but later got turned around and sided with the activists against masks at the beginning of the pandemic. But he says, well, conservatives always made it about him, maybe because of his high media profile, when it was the consensus of scientists, and sometimes the scientists were wrong.
Again, I mean, you know, 2 + 2 is 4, but medicine specifically are theories. And we find out that these theories can be accurate or not. We have things we're doing today that were theories that don't help us, right? Vitamin C does not necessarily prevent you from getting a cold. And I still pop it when I feel like I'm getting a cold. Right. But that's what it is. Medicine is ongoing. It's an evolutionary process, and it will be long after we're gone, with everything, COVID included, and anything that comes down the pike in the future.
Well, Fauci will be gone in December, but I have a feeling we'll still have to be hearing from him with Capitol Hill investigations. Molly Hemingway and Leslie Marshall, thanks so much.